Hello, welcome to a new segment on my channel I'm going to be calling Movies on Movies. It just came into my head the other day and I thought it'd be a cool thing to do because not a lot of people do this, where they review making of films. Now there are films that are about the making of movies that are, big screen releases, they go in cinemas and things like that. There are other films that are about the making of films that are just relegated to Blu-ray and DVD releases or Laserdisc releases. And I like talking about them sometimes. So this will be the start of that, and I'm going to bend the rules somewhat. There might be a film that I talk about that isn't a documentary but is a narrative fiction film that is about making movies or something like that, like Ed Wood for example, for me would fit in the criteria of movies on movies. And this one kind of bends the rule as well to kick things off. This is about a movie star more than the making of a particular movie, and it is Mifune, The Last Samurai. I heard about this about a year ago and I couldn't wait to see it. Finally, I got a chance to see it a couple of days ago and I loved it. As a documentary, I don't think it was incredible, I thought it was very well made, very well put together, but the one thing that maybe holds it back a little bit is that there's no interviews from the focus of the film, which is legendary Japanese actor Toshio Mifune, who just had an incredible run in the 50s and 60s in Japan, working in Toho Studios, and particularly with Akira Kurosawa, who he made, I think, 16 films with. Kurosawa, one of the greatest directors of all time, and Mifune, once he hooked up with Kurosawa, I mean, that's one of those, that's like Scorsese, De Niro, it's one of those director-actor partnerships that really, it's like two geniuses meeting and kind of making better stuff. You can look at some of the films that Mifune was in without Kurosawa that don't maybe have the same magic, and you can look at some of the films that Kurosawa made that Mifune wasn't in, and you could say there might not be the same magic. Seven Samurai, Yojimbo, Sanjuro, Hidden Fortress, Throne of Blood, Drunken Angel. I mean, there's ones I haven't seen as well, like Redbeard, which I really want to get to. What this film does, which I thought was quite interesting, was it doesn't just start at the beginning of Toshiro Mifune's life and say, okay, he was born on this date and so on. It does all that stuff, but it really focuses in the beginning on the genre of film that he left such an indelible stamp on, which is the samurai movie, the Chambara films, swordplay films, and it goes into the history of those films very briefly, but it gives you the background on how Japan, from the very beginning of their kind of history of films, were making swordplay movies. And it ties in very nicely to the beginnings of him, and you get an early background on his life and how he wasn't really interested in acting to begin with, and how he served in the war and then got into acting almost accidentally, and then the story kind of continues from there. Key films are touched on, and what's really exciting for me as a fan of Kurosawa, of Mifune, is seeing all the interviews that the filmmakers were able to secure for this documentary. There's people who were in Seven Samurai, there's people who starred alongside Mifune in multiple films. Some of his female co-stars are interviewed for this documentary. His son is interviewed for the documentary. Kurosawa's son is interviewed for the documentary. So you get all these people, like a script supervisor, this old woman who worked on a lot of Kurosawa's films, and so you get these direct stories. Probably my favorite moment was the actor who plays the lead villager, the young villager in Seven Samurai. He talks about how he would get kind of grumpy on set with Seven Samurai. It would take a long time to set things up, and conditions weren't great, and he'd get grumpy and stuff about it. And he'd say that Mifune never did that. He was always just sitting there, just waiting, calm, cool, collected. I'm paraphrasing, but you hear these great stories about him, and get to hear about some of the parts of his life that perhaps weren't the best. His penchant for drinking a lot and things like that. There's a particularly hairy story where his son recalls Mifune getting drunk and pulling his sword out and swinging it around and scaring everyone, which you can kind of laugh at, but in the back of your head is like that would be pretty almost traumatizing for a kid. So it doesn't give you a very rosy portrait of the man, but at the same time it's not a real in-depth look. It's an hour and 20 minutes. It really kind of just covers the broad strokes of his career and some of his greatest hits, and to see those clips just makes me want to go back to all those films again and to watch the ones I haven't seen. So as a fan of Mifune, I think that it is required viewing. as a newcomer, I think it would be a great thing to watch to kind of get you into the idea of what his acting style was like. You know, for my money, he's one of the greatest actors that ever lived. He had such a powerful, commanding presence on the screen that is just unmatched. And there's also you know, Martin Scorsese, Steven Spielberg talking about him in the film as well, and they kind of touch on things like that too. So yeah, this is a great kind of movie star profile. It doesn't quite reach top tier kind of, you know, making of documentary level. Again, it's retrospective, so a lot of archival stuff. I love the selection of old photographs. Hearing that he was very close with Takashi Shimura, who's another one of the greatest actors of all time, so it was cool to see some behind the scenes photos of them. There's a great little clip of them filming the climactic showdown in Yojimbo that someone recorded on set in color on 8mm, so that was a really cool little tidbit. There's loads of little great things in there. There's like a guy who got killed by Mifune more than 100 times in movies, and he gets interviewed in the film, so they really did their homework on this. It's a great little again, profile on Toshiro Mifune, one of the all-time greats, and I would highly recommend it. So that's it for the first installment of Movies on Movies. There's plenty more I'd like to talk about, and if you have any favorites, let me know. But otherwise, I'll be hoping to continue this series on a regular-ish basis moving forward. And yeah, this was a really, really good film. I wouldn't say it's great, but as a fan, I loved it, and again, very good insight. I'm repeating myself, I'll leave it there. Thank you for watching, and if you are a fan of Toshiro Mifune, what are some of your favourite films that he appeared in, and why? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thanks for watching, I'll see you in the next one.
It's alright by me. Apart from the fact he throws cans of Carlin into a tree. Yeah, he's really cool. Yeah, he's really cool. But he's not quite as cool as you, 'cause